Morning all, another very exciting round in the Sinquefield Cup. Yesterday in round 6 there were some exciting games. Let's have a look at Caruana against Topalov. So Caruana, on a startling performance up to this game, prior to this game, 5 out of 5. Was he going to make it 6 out of 6? Could Topalov stop him? So Caruana with the white pieces kicks off with E4. And we have actually a Sicilian defence from Topalov. So the opening statement is that of playing for a win, not being content with a solid opening like E5. But you know, C5 for me is more of a fighting spirit. So after knight F3, we see here the Sicilian Topalov emerge after E6, D4, C takes, knight C6, and now white plays knight c3, and we see a6 here. Very popular move. Other popular moves: queen c7 or knight f6, but a6 being played. And white usually actually just plays bishop e2 here. It seems that's the most popular choice in my live book here. But actually, knight takes c6. That's the second most popular move. But quite a lot of games from this position as well. Knight takes c6, and after b takes c6, yeah, black's getting another pawn towards the centre. But you see this bishop's kind of hemmed in by its own pawns. It's going to take time to be useful. I think usually it will try and occupy this diagonal to put pressure later on this diagonal, but it's a long way off. And in the meantime, white can do various things. White can try and actually strengthen the central grip on the dark squares, particularly e5 will be a useful square for white to have a dark square grip on. We see after bishop d3, black plays now d5 here, and Caruana castled, knight f6, and the tension here is kept actually. White might be tempted to play e5. I'm not sure this is that good. After e5, knight d7, black can immediately start targeting that e5 pawn like this, and this might be okay for black, or it's comparable to the game anyway. But as soon as a move like f4 is played, it looks a little bit like a French defense kind of setup. So that's interesting as well. Not too far away from the game really. So after knight f6, we see rook e1 though, supporting e4. I don't think black wants to take on e4 here because he'll be wrecking the structure. Look at this structure, it'll be very isolated pawns. So after takes here, for example, takes, white could even play bishop takes. Doesn't matter about the exchange of queens here. Queen takes, say this position looks very passive for black, and I think white would have a very concrete advantage here. Either bishop f4, bishop e3. These pawns are just not very nice to look at. Okay, so in the game, after rook e1, we see bishop e7. So Topalov is not minding the e5 move here. Now the bishop's committed away, you'll notice, from that g7. And this is a common idea now that's often played. e5, knight d7. And with the bishop away from g7 to insert now, and it's made possible with this rook protecting e5 as well, to insert queen g4, hitting g7. And this is a little bit awkward for black here. Does he retreat the bishop? Does he play king f8? The thing is, I think if he castles, there's going to be horrible punishment here in bishop h6 for threatening mate. And actually, kind of winning the exchange really. And if g6, we just win the exchange, bishop takes f8. What else is there? Not much. Black doesn't want to do anything else. That's horrendous. So no, that's to be avoided. So this awkward looking king f8 is played actually. If bishop f8, you know, backward development there, very pleasant looking for white. Even though the position's kind of closed, you might think the tempo gains are not that important, but it's still comfortable. If you look at this position here, actually, you know, it's playable actually for black because it's closed. It's not totally outrageous. You know, Petrosian has often had games where he's had backward development, but as long as the position is quite closed, Maybe this is okay. This position here, for example, G6 is mentioned by the engine as being virtually equal. So actually, you know, this has got something going for it. It's just, you might think, how is black developing later? Well, you know, there's resources here like Rook B4. So it's interesting. But in the game, yeah, we see quite a committal decision in King F8. Okay, so the Rook, though, being kept in its default square, does support H5 later, which might be useful in conjunction with G5 for aggression here. So for the moment, white in this position to play. White now plays Knight A4. So this provides things like C4 now on the cards. Potentially the dark square grip could be useful on C5 as well. It does have a tactical point to it as well, though this rook's kind of loose, potentially negative tactical point. The rook's actually loose after that move, and the knight's just got out of that diagonal. So this next move pounces on that. Queen A5, hitting the rook. And you'll notice the queen is the only thing protecting that knight at the moment as well. So here, let's see, moving the knight back might actually be okay, but white doesn't want to do that. To defend the rook, white just moves the rook, so it's only the knight protected by the queen, and it seems quite a natural forcing move now to use the rook, which is in its default location, to support this H5, kick the queen. Okay, here the queen keeps an eye out on A4 with Queen F4, and again another aggressive move, G5. Now it's here that white has to tread carefully with regard to the knight on A4. If, for example, Queen D4, I don't think that looks quite right after C5. White's losing a piece. So this next move seems forced, Bishop D2, to counter-attack the black queen. And it's at this point, which is quite interesting, that black could get the queens off, and it doesn't seem such a bad move actually to get the queens off here. Probably, in retrospect, it seems like a very good idea. Sometimes to keep as black to get the queens off, and as white to kind of keep the queens on for the initiative later. So if black did play G takes F4, this wasn't played, we have the queens off, you might think, well, this pawn's weak. Well, actually this G file is actually quite useful, and if you look at this variation, for example, Bishop B7, the bishop and rook could potentially be useful together. If now Bishop D2, then here F3 is immediately useful, for example taking C5, and black seems to have good play, threatening C4, F4, we can target this knight, and yeah, it just seems like a nice position here. For example, like this, there's going to be pressure on the G file, and this looks very, very pleasant. So if white has to take a move to stop F3 here by playing F3 in this position, then black actually can get on with things with Rook G8, which is tactically useful in cooperation with this bishop. For example, B3, C5, Rook F1, Rook G5, and it looks to be, you know, about equal this sort of position. Bishop D2, we can take on E5. And you might wonder, well, isn't the F pawn really quite a liability here? This F pawn isn't that why Caruana didn't play this? You know, we can block that F pawn and then immediately attack it here, for example. Actually, black can gain an important tempo here with C5 to threaten C4. So if white, that bishop's eventually going to be trapped on bishop takes F4, like this, and then the bishop's trapped. So white has to parry C4 here, so that's an important key tempo. Say to play C4 here, pardon me, so C4, this position, we're now threatening as black bishop takes f3, so it doesn't matter about f4 here. So if white has to take time to get out of bishop takes f3, then black again seems to have a very good position. For example, like this, it should be about equal. So in all this, it seems that this was a critical decision here at this point, where black could have just taken the queen off. It seems evidence that I've researched prior to this game indicates that the queens could have come off, but Topalov plays queen c7. Now I think this is a dangerous position in theory, more so personally for the black king, because it seems as though even though these two pawns look menacing, white's rooks and pieces generally seem to have more scope. White's got that central wedge in the center of that e5 pawn. So anyway, we see queen g3 and another tempo gainer, but the pawns are not going backwards here, and they're relinquishing light squares. But this is another interesting tactical point though here. It seems e5 is being undermined here after queen g4. It's tempting, it would seem, to play knight takes e5. It looks a bit greedy, but it might actually be one of the better moves in this position. Let's have a quick look at it. Knight takes e5. At first glance, it seems it's going to tactically backfire to rook takes e5, but the engine actually changes its mind basically on higher depths here. That this skewer now, bishop c3, looks extremely painful. The thing is, at the end of this, queen f4, again, we can forcibly get the queens off. And this is very, very interesting now. After the queens come off, we get that g file, we get another pawn to the center. And after bishop takes h8, we can trap the bishop long term with f6. And this position seems to be very close to equality. White's ambitions in the opposite coloured bishop and pawn ending, say after knight b6, taking on c8, taking here, we have, if this bishop's going to be munched, an opposite coloured bishop and pawn ending. Say this position, it looks as though this should eventually be a draw. This is only a fractional advantage for white after rook takes b2. The rook can stumble back, and we've got opposite coloured bishops. So that's another way of playing the position. Again, another opportunity to kind of tactically get the queens off there after this queen g4, knight takes e5. I mean, does white have better than taking on e5? I'm not sure. Queen d4, there's bishop f6 or f6, either, maybe f6, and that seems, on the surface, it seems it might be okay for black, this position. Any f4, there's c5 here. And we get this G file again, if nothing else. Black gets some dynamic play here. Maybe taking here even. So that looks like an okay position as well. So anyway, in this position, after this h4, queen g4, this pawn actually wasn't touched. We see instead rook g8, and this is where the engines, they don't particularly like this move much. Giving white an advantage, and okay, it's getting out of the skewing tactic, so knight e5 looks to be on here, so this pawn is actually supported more. It's kind of overprotected, so rook a e1, and so it represents a nice bind on the position, and white's sitting on the light squares. And in fact, after this next move c5, it seems to me that this is not really a big deal anymore because of this bishop h7 and queen h5. White is gliding around the light squares quite comfortably here. Just for sake of argument, well, in the game c4 did stop c4 from black, but just for the sake of argument, let's play h3. I don't think c4 is such a big deal. The bishop can go here, and it looks a little bit dangerous for the black king. Mind you, here king g7, bishop g6 though tactically might actually be even okay for white. Okay, but anyway, c4 was prevented after c5. White played c4, and now black took on c4. Bishop takes c4, and the bishop is staring with the queen on e6. The king is still looking quite precarious in theory. Bishop b7 now, so the bishop's finally active, and now we see h3. Black might have been intending tactically in some variations in the future something to do with the bishop, the rook and this pawn, but this extinguishes that pawn anyway, so black's more frozen here. Has black got many moves in this position? In fact, if knight b6, there's bishop a5. Ouch. So it looks as though black is getting a bit stuck. You see this overprotection of e5 is a great bind on the position. White's got more central influence here, sitting comfortably on the light squares. This bishop is actually hemmed in by its own pawn. I like white positioning myself here, the look of white. Rook d8, and now we see tactically as though something might be going on in some variations. This bishop is adding weight to the central pressure now after bishop c3. Now black reroutes the knight, knight b8 to head for c6, more aggressive square, where it can exert influence on d4, maybe jump into d4. Is this too ambitious for black's position? Interesting point here. Caruana's next move is rook e3. So what on earth does rook e3 do, you might wonder? It's kind of, at the moment, it looks to me, it's quite a mysterious move, actually. It keeps hold of everything. It provides the flexibility that maybe rook f3 could be inserted if the bishop was not on f3. That could be a useful tactical idea for rook f3. It's adding that as another resource in the position for white, an attacking resource, because note the king's on f8, so being able to insert rook f3 at the appropriate moment is useful. So does black have to tread very carefully here? Well, yes, actually. Perhaps it was a good idea to make sure that this line isn't covered, but this next move covers that line, knight c6. So the bishop is not looking at f3 now, and in fact, in this position, white plays a very interesting move indeed. I wonder if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, you can guess what white's move here is in this position. Okay, bishop takes e6. Yeah, this looks really dangerous now with this rook f3 check potentially, if nothing else, as well as queen e6 after. What are black's options here? I don't think you can play something like this. This is just looks terrible. Maybe just bishop c4. Thanks very much. Just chewed up black's position. It's going to play e6. So black's committed to having to defend this position after this. After f takes, now rook f3 check. Was that really silly of Topalov to do this? Before we carry on here, let's rewind for a moment. Rook e3. Could black have just done something else? Say bishop d5. I mean, at least this gets rid of the attacking bishop for bishop e6 to be extinguished. This way of doing it seems, from an engine perspective, seems safer. There doesn't seem to be any full blast of bishop e6 here in the f file. Seems more safe, more solid, is a word you could use here. Yes, that seems to be a viable move. Bishop d5, or even rook g7. Just keep an eye on f3. I don't think the bishop e6 is particularly convincing here, although even here there seems to be some potential for white. It's not completely bad for white, but in this position, yes, it seems as though it's a little bit on the provocative side. So bishop e6 takes e6, and now we see the rook f3 check resource. Queen takes e6, so hitting the rook. Not too many options here for black. Topalov played rook g7. If he plays rook f8, in this position, it looks as though knight takes c5 might be the most incisive move, threatening I'm 18-2 now because the exit d7 is covered. What does black do in this position? If rook takes f3, strong is, for example, g takes f3, and white is now threatening the vicious check and knight e6, so which is difficult to do something about, I think, here. What does black do in this position against that? If knight d4, check, then bishop takes d4. If bishop takes here, bishop takes, queen f6 check. Here, although a bishop down, white now has e6, threatening queen f7. And this is looking very dangerous for black. Queen e7, for example, check. This position here, white has this e7 coming up, and it's going to be the exchange up. That's check, so it's going to be the exchange up. It seems with the king in the center, there's numerous possibilities, tactical possibilities being generated here after this queen takes e6. So yeah, rook f8 doesn't seem to hold up to great scrutiny after knight takes c5. I mean, how much material does white have for the bishop sacrifice here? 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 pawns for the piece, but even accepting this position, it just looks very, very bad. Knight takes e5 instead, check. Bishop takes e5, ouch. And then here, in this position, we've got all sorts. We got check here, for example, queen e6 checkmate. So this would force the queen to be lost. So it looks very, very unpleasant here. Rook f8, yeah, for knight c5. Rook h8. Let's rule this out. Knight takes c5 again. Even better. We're just threatening queen g6 mate. If rook d7 check, this position, check, we just win the queen. So yeah, it just seems as though this is big trouble is heading black's way here after this bishop sack and this rook on f3. Big trouble indeed. I'm not sure the defensive resources. Knight d4, let's try and look at some others. We just lose the rook. It's not particularly nice to lose the rook there. Just come here. Doesn't matter about losing the exchange now. That's horrible for black. I think in particular this e6 pawn means like bishop e5 is on the card soon as well. Okay, so yeah, that's not particularly good either. Knight d4. What else? There doesn't seem much else. Knight b4. We just take the rook again. Check. This is good. We can take on d8. We can play anything here. We can even take the queens off. So yeah, very hard for black, it seems already. So rook g7 was played. Interesting. Rook g7. Now in this position, actually, one thing about rook g7, I don't think knight takes c5 is not as convincing. Knight d4, and without any queen g6 check, so that's the idea. And f7's covered. These two key squares are covered. This doesn't look so convincing. So that would justify Topalov's move quite well to play knight takes c5 in this particular position here. Instead, a change of tack, a very strong move, and the engine really likes it. I wonder if you can guess what white played in this particular position. But I was about to say precision, but it is a precision move in this particular position. So a high precision move in this position. If I give you 5 seconds starting from now, what would you play with white? Okay. White plays queen h6. And it looks as though, okay, if rook f7, we can rule that out, I think. There's all sorts of tasty moves here, like queen g6, for example. What does black do there? The bishop's, if it moves, then there's e6, ouch. So that doesn't look good to walk into a pin. Rook g8, if we look at that, now here, white has e6, threatening a mate in 2 with check and mating on f7, and this is horrible for black to face. What does black do here? If he vacates d8, then actually, you know, even this check is still very, very dangerous with rook d3 check, and black starts falling apart. Knight takes c5. If takes, bishop takes d4. It's looking really horrible. Say like this, check, and you can see that black's going to have to give up the queen, because otherwise it's getting mated. So that starts to look really, really horrible here after rook g8, e6. Yeah, this check is actually really, really dangerous. Difficult to suggest any defenses here for black, really, quite vicious. So actually in the game, after queen h6, we see knight d4. So with knight d4, Topalov is leaving his rook hanging here on g7. And there's also, though, some other possibilities as well, not just taking the rook. And in fact, it's one of these other possibilities that is used here instead of simply taking the rook. Let's look at simply taking the rook first. Queen takes g7. Say bishop takes f3. Even in this position, you know, white is not compelled to take on f3. That would be very nice for black. White can still, in this position, play e6, and this is very good for white. This is a very, very dangerous threat, like mating here on f7. So what does black do here? It's still very troublesome. Knight takes e6. We have check. And then queen takes e6, white's still better. So it looks as though black is in a very bad state here with this e6 resource that can be used in many different variations. And in fact, it's used straight away, straight off the bat. e6 straight off the bat. Threatening queen h8 check, rook g8 and mate on g8 straight away. So leaving the rook hanging. That's not taken, just e6 instead. Very difficult choices for Topalov here. He actually plays knight takes f3 check. I mean, what else? If rook g8, then queen h5 check. We're mating on g6. So that pawn is holding that escape square from the king. Okay, so horrible position. Knight takes f3 check was played. G takes. Now it looks as though white's threatening check here and other checks which are quite dangerous. Let's see. Let's just put a token move in to see what the exact threat is. This a token move here is a mate in 4 with check, check, and here, yeah, can you see bishop g7 actually is forcing the mate here. So that's what black is threatened now with, a mate in 4 like that, quite vicious. So this next move, bishop f8, I guess tries to parry that. Now we see check here, and after king e7, white simply took the rook. I mean, white is doing fantastically well just taking the rook here, and black actually resigned, felt compelled to resign here. So queen f7 is still on. If bishop takes, queen f7. In this position, yes, the queen's protecting the bishop, and white needs to play a good move here actually. Rook d1 check wouldn't be at all clever. Bishop d4 and black's winning really. But in this position here, white has e7, and that introduces queen e6 checkmate, as well as hitting the rook. And it's difficult for black to do anything in this particular position. If bishop d5, then white can win in all sorts of ways now. Just take this simply, that's check, and then take on G7. So rook up there. So what else? If we can't defend, if we defend like that, we just take this again, take the rook, and it's actually a mate in 5 as well after check here, check. So I don't think the resignation was too soon. Now it's just I guess it's a shame not to see that move on the board, E7, but it's absolutely crushing. If King C6 here, then we don't have to queen a knight or anything with check. We can actually play rook E6 here, King B5, and now we can actually, white can actually take this, and if it takes here, Queen B6 is mating like this. Quite pretty ideas emerge there. So yeah, I guess it would be nice to sort of see more of this game after E7. Yeah, interesting possibilities. It all seems to be winning for white though. Yeah, too dangerous here. So yeah, after bishop takes, yeah, Topalov kind of resigned here. If he tries to flee with his king here, then we can just play check here. King C6, we can take the queen off. Okay, hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube, and what a fantastic performance from Caruana, now on 6 out of 6, unheard of I think in chess history, against such strong opposition, to just win every single game, 6 in a row, destroying the elite in the chess world at the moment, one by one. Thanks very much.